I love
I love
I love failure.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Young, and I'm a proud immigrant entrepreneur, investor, writer. I was born in Hong Kong. Does anyone know where Hong Kong is? Oh, a lot of people. Okay, I was born in Hong Kong. I lived in China. I lived in Taiwan. I lived in Canada, and right now I live in New York City, which is one of my favorite cities in the world. I live in New York City, and 4 years ago I moved to New York City in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I didn't know anyone when I moved there. When I moved there, I started hosting events so that I could meet people, and to date, I've turned it into an events business similar to this, but much less cooler. Similar to this, we've turned it into a 7-figure business. I've invested over 20 companies, and I'm known in New York for someone who is a community builder and brings together the immigrant community. So that's just a little bit about myself. I'm here to talk to you about today, to talk about, let's see if this thing works, the gift of being an underdog. And I'm going to share 3 stories from my time in America, 3 things I've learned about being an underdog. But before I do, I want to get a sense of who's in the room. Does anyone, who here knows what an underdog is? All right, so about half the room. Now keep your hand up if you consider yourself an underdog. About a quarter of the room. Who here has been through some sort of adversity or hardship or struggle at some point in their lives? Okay, most people here. Let's get to see. So I'm going to convince you by the end of this talk why being an underdog, traditionally an underdog is not thought of, the sort of the best label to have, but being an underdog is actually the most powerful gift you can give yourself. So I'll start with the first story. The first story is about giving without the expectation of return. Now, when I was growing up, my parents were some of the most generous people I had ever met. And, we didn't have a lot of money. We lived in a small apartment, and, there was a time where they almost went bankrupt, in 2008. Yet they were some of the most generous people I'd ever met. And they would host these dinners for all their friends. They would buy gifts for everyone. And they would spend so much of their time giving back to the community, helping their friends and their family, and even strangers that they didn't know. And what I've realized is that it is so rare for people in such scarce positions to be so abundant with love and generosity and with their time. Who here knows someone like that? All right. And I've realized that there are these really giving people, and they had never asked for anything. But there was a point where they had to move to a new country, and they had moved 3 times in their life because of my dad's job. But there was a time where they needed to move to a new country, and that was the only time they asked for help. And they raised their hand and they asked, "Who can support us? Who can introduce us to someone in this new country? Who can help us relocate? Who can help our son get into another school in this new country?" And it gave back tenfold. The community gave back, and the community helped them, gave them introductions, gave them advice, gave them the support they needed to move. Now, I have a similar story. I moved to New York City 4 years ago, and I moved there in August 2020. And if you remember sort of that time period, it was during the COVID-19 epidemic. And this was when New York City was in the headlines of being the hotbed of COVID-19. I'm not sure if you guys remember that. And when I moved there, I didn't have a network. I didn't really have friends. I didn't really know anybody. And when I moved there, one of the first things I did was I was incredibly lonely. And I told myself I needed to meet people. So I went, and by the way, this is a picture of me with my only friend moving into my first apartment in New York City. I didn't really have furniture, but I did. You can't really see it, but there's a view of the Chrysler building in the back that made it all worth it. I didn't have anything else. And what I would do is I would go on Reddit, and I would go on Twitter, and I'd go on Facebook. Does anyone here use Reddit? Good amount of people. I would go on Reddit, and I would ask who wants to hang out with me. And over time, I would host these meetups outdoors, of course, because it was COVID. I would host these meetups that started with like 10 people and eventually, a couple hundred people. And over the last 4 years, I hosted over 200 events. 40,000 people across 8 different cities. And I've helped hundreds of people get jobs, raise money for their startups, meet customers, make friends, and in some cases find love. I actually met my girlfriend from one of these events, and I had never asked for anything in return. By the way, all these events were free. You didn't have to buy a ticket to go. They were completely free of charge. And 1 year ago, when I quit my job at Google, I used to work at Google. When I quit my job at Google and I asked the community for support, it came back tenfold. And I got letters of recommendation. I got my first clients from the community. I got first sponsors. I got a bit of press. And that's when I learned my first lesson. Give without the expectation of return, and it will come back tenfold. Now, actually, I have another picture there. This is a picture from one of my events a few months ago. It's a little bit more like a party. The second story is about doing hard things. So growing up, I had always wanted to live in America. And for someone, I'd spent 18 years in China. For someone living in China, America was the goal. If you made it to America, your parents are proud of you, and you would have made it. Does anyone here feel the same way? Is it the same here, or is it just a Chinese thing? Seems like it's just a Chinese. You guys don't want to go. Okay, it's probably just a Chinese thing. Though I believe that the only thing that would make my parents proud is if I moved to America. Seems like it's a very Chinese thing. And I think it's a product of, watching movies. All the Hollywood movies are based in New York City, like Spider-Man, based in New York City, based in America. So I made it my life's mission to move to America at one point. And in 2020, I thought it was the right time to try to make a move to America. And the hardest part about moving to America is the visa process. It's incredibly complex. Even though there's so many immigrants who go to America every single year, it's still incredibly difficult. And so in 2020, I told myself the easiest way to get there was to get into a company, like a big company like a Facebook or Google, and ask them to sponsor my visa. But the thing is, I had shitty grades. I didn't have a good job at the time. I didn't have a great background. And I was never a student that was the top of the class. And so what I did is over the span of a year, I quit drinking so I could just focus on this thing. I emailed thousands of people. I applied to thousands of jobs. I did hundreds of interviews. And then finally, I got a job offer from Facebook. And this was sometime in May 2020. But right when I got that job offer, Trump was president, and he tweeted, "I am banning all immigration." And that night, I didn't sleep. It was the happiest moment of my life when I got the job offer, but it was also the most stressful when I heard about the immigration thing. But over the next 6 months, I worked with my lawyers, and I did a bunch of different things, and I finally made it to America, and I was working for Facebook. And the whole point of this, if you remember, is I wanted to live in America. But at one point, I asked Facebook for a green card. Anyone know what a green card is? Green card? Okay. I needed a green card to stay in America without working a job. Facebook was like, listen, we've given too many green cards. We're not going to give you one. So I left. And I went to the next biggest company that I thought would give me a green card. I did that whole process over again. Thousands of emails, hundreds of interviews. And I ended up working at Google. Because Google was like, come over, we'll give you a green card. 6 months later, they said, just kidding. No green card for you. So at one point, I was like, this is kind of bullshit. And I heard about a new kind of visa. Sorry, not a new kind, but I heard about a visa called the Extraordinary Alien Visa. And what it would let you do is build your own company and live in America on your own terms. That's what I wanted. And so I started that process. And I won't get into it too much, but it required 5 or 6 different things. You needed press. You needed to author articles. You needed to be part of exclusive organizations. You needed a really high salary. You needed a successful company. All these things. Or you could win the Nobel Peace Prize. I went for the former strategy. And over the next year, I did all these things. Same thing. I cold emailed hundreds of journalists, asking them to write about me. I pitched tons of publications with these articles. I applied to hundreds of membership organizations, these exclusive memberships organizations, and I did all these things. And today I'm very lucky to have been featured in Bloomberg and Fast Company, Fortune magazine, all these amazing press outlets. And almost exactly a year ago, my visa came in the mail. And my O1, my extraordinary alien visa came in the mail, and it allowed me to build my company on my own terms and live in America on my own terms. I missed a few slides here, but this was a piece of press that came out, and this was the second happiest moment in my life when I got my visa, and I knew I could stay in America without having to work for a big company. And what I've realized is that your confidence and your self-image is composed of all the historical evidence of all the hard things you've done. And the more hard things you push yourself to do, the more competent you will see yourself to be. And actually, the proof that you can do hard things is one of the most powerful gifts you can give yourself. That's my second lesson. Now, the last story I'll share is about the idea of eating bitterness. And growing up, my parents never complained. They did all these hard things. They never complained. Who knows someone like that? They never complained. And so my dad would work. It's me over there. My dad would work 100-hour weeks. And there was something in China called the 996. 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. That was only 72 hours, but he worked from 70 to 100 hours a week. My mom had to take care of her family, who was often sick, but they had never complained. And in China, we have this phrase called 吃苦, which translates to eating bitterness. But what it metaphorically means is to endure hardship or adversity without complaining. I believe that when you're an underdog, you often have big dreams and you want to do extraordinary things. And for most people, they have the option whether they want to do these things or not. But for an underdog, you don't have the option. It's absolutely necessary. You have to do these things. And it's only through eating bitterness that you get to enjoy the moments of sweetness that come afterward. Being an underdog is really hard. You start with less resources and less support, less of a community. You might face issues with your confidence and your self-image and cultural belonging and all these things. And you often have to work much, much harder than other people to get to the same point. But I actually think being an underdog, when you look at these things, they're actually not weaknesses. They're enormous strengths. You just have to dig below the surface. They're enormous strengths that give you adversity and grit and determination. And I believe that being an underdog is the most powerful gift you can give yourself. And so all those people there who consider themselves underdogs, the 50% of the room that raised their hand and possibly more that didn't, I hope you realize that it is actually the biggest blessing there is. I'm at time. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
I love failure.
I love
I love failure.